Hi, welcome to APA Style 7th edition, part 1, Creating References, the third video in the series, Deep Diving into the Elements. My name is Josette Kubicki, and I'm the Liaison Librarian for the Departments of Teaching and Leading and Psychological Sciences here at Augusta University. So before we had looked at the elements overall, the elements of author, date, title, and source, like those 4 elements. And now what I'm going to do is deep dive into them and take a look at the nitty gritty so you can learn how to format these elements, because APA, it is a style and it wants you to style these elements in particular ways. So let's take a look at the first author. So the first element, as in the first element, the author. So the author means the individual or individuals or the group responsible for the work. So group authors, this means things like organizations, for example, government agencies, schools, hospitals, professional groups, universities, and so on. So if you can't find individual names, then look for the group author. So for a government agency author, use the specific agency. For example, let's take a look at these suicide prevention publications, see who's authoring that. So there are all these publications that we can download, but who is the author behind each of them? When we scroll down, we can see this is the NIMH, Information Resource Center. So this is by the National Institute of Mental Health. Now, what you do want to do, though, is go into the publication and double check to see, has an individual person written this publication? And they have not. So the National Institute of Mental Health, they are the author. They're the group author that we can see listed on this publication. So do not abbreviate the group authors in the reference list. So put in the group author in full as you see it in the reference entry. For example, National Institute of Mental Health, not NIMH. So also regarding the author element, let's take a look at how you would format the author. I had gone over this briefly in my previous examples of common reference types. So for individual authors, format it with the surname, comma, and then their initials. If you have multiple individuals, then put an ampersand. If you've got 2 individuals, then put an ampersand in between. If you have even more individuals than that, then separate each individual with a comma and then have an ampersand between the second last individual and the last individual. For group authors, what you do is you write them out how you see them. So with the authors, what we're doing is we're flipping the names. So we're putting the surname and then the initials of their first name and middle name. For the group, for the organization, we don't flip anything around. We just write it as we see it. For example, American Psychological Association or stopbullying.gov. And like I said before, if it's a government agency, then put in the specific agency name. So for example, the National Council on Disability and the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. These are specific government agencies or departments. So also regarding the author element, here's a general rule of thumb. Journal articles, news articles, and books, they typically have individual authors. Some individual or individuals have authored them and we see their names. Web pages and web page articles tend to have group authors. Some web pages do have individual authors, but a lot of the time I see group authors. Reports, blog posts, and videos, they tend to have either kind of author. Bit of a luck of the draw with that one. So with these, use the individual's names if they are clearly labeled as author. So if you can tell that the individual is an author, then use their name. Otherwise, use the group author name. So default, use the individual name. If not, write the group author name. Include the social handle of the author, if applicable. For example, if there's a tweet or a Facebook post, then include that person's social handle as well. So for instance, let's take a look at how to cite a tweet. So under how to reference different source types, I click on social media, Twitter, and I can see that I have in my general guidelines that we write the account name as is, followed by the username in square brackets. And that username is their social handle. And then we can see in the formatting, we've got the account name followed by the username in square brackets with the @ So take some care when identifying the author. With web pages, it can be a little tricky. Let's take a look at this web page article. Bullying, kids not likely to defend random classmates. So this is a little tricky one because we can obviously see a group author, Vice President for Communications, Michigan News, University of Michigan. So there's a group author here, University of Michigan News. But then we also see another name here, Contact Jared Wadley. And you think, well, could he be the author? So it can be a little bit hard to tell when there's just a contact, but if you click on the name, you can see if you can tell more about his job. And we can see that he covers various units affiliated with the College of Literature, Science and Arts. So he joined the Michigan News. So he covers news for these different units. So we can safely assume that he is the author. Now, if there was just no way of telling if he is the author or not, then I would default to the group author. All right, so that's that one. Now let's take a look at this web page. It's a web page from a website on ADHD, and it is by Cleveland. We can see that Cleveland Clinic is a group author, but is there another author? Let's take a look. Is there someone who has written this article? You might find the individual author underneath the heading, or you might need to scroll down to the bottom and see if there is an author listed there. Now it says, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see this. Okay, last reviewed by a Cleveland Clinic medical professional on this date. So last reviewed by, this really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they authored this Cleveland Clinic medical professional, doesn't necessarily mean that they authored the work. It just means that they reviewed it to see if it's credible and still providing good advice. So we do not include a name that is associated with last reviewed by. So we do not put Cleveland Clinic medical professional. And what we do is we default to the group author, which is Cleveland Clinic. So for the group author of web pages, look out for a logo and a name next to the logo. If you're finding it a little bit harder to tell, Also see if you can try and find if there is an About Us page. All websites should have an About Us page. And that will give you information on the organization behind the website. All right. So let's move on to dates, the second element of your reference entry. So the date in a reference, it is usually the year of publication in APA style, but not always. Some types of references ask that you use specific dates. If you recall, when I was showing you the example of how to cite a report, you need to include the year, month, and day for that, if that is available. So to figure out what type of reference uses specific dates and which ones just use the year of publication only, look at the APA style manual for the particular reference type, and it will tell you. This information is also in our APA citation guide. So be careful with the copyright date. For books, you use the copyright date. And for journal articles, you use the copyright date. But for websites, web pages, blog posts, anything online, don't use the copyright date unless the content seems to match the copyright date. The reason for this is because websites are stamped with a copyright date when they have first launched. You know, this website is copyrighted on this date. And years later, a new article will appear on that website, and it would be years in the future from when the website was originally copyrighted. So only use a copyright date if the content in the website or web page tends to match the copyright date that is showing, like there's clues in the content that's indicating that it's in line with the copyright date. So general rule of thumb here, works published on a more frequent basis tend to have more specific dates. So for example, blog posts, web pages, and videos, sources like that come out fairly often tend to have more specific dates than do works that are published less often, like journal articles and books. If you cannot find a date at all, put N.D. That stands for no date. If you can guesstimate the date, given the clues in the content of what you're looking at, then put CA. With the year inside the parentheses. For example, CA. 2019. And that stands for circa. So circa 2019. As I said earlier, check our APA citation guide for the particular source type that you want to cite to see how specific the date should be. So for instance, if we take a look at how to reference different source types and we go down to e-newspaper article, we take a look at the format, and I'll zoom in so you can see that. Take a look at the format, and you can see that for an e-newspaper article, we want the year, the month, day of publication. So for example, 2020, February 21. So that is as specific as they want you to be. Now, if you can only find the month and day, then just list that. But it is telling you, put in the year, month, and day if you can see that. Meanwhile, if we go down to a dictionary and encyclopedia, we only put in the year of publication. I need to fix these so they have the publication year in them. So we put in the year of publication. So that is on the date. Regarding the third element, the title of the item, Typically, you would find the full title on the inner title page of a book, the first page of a journal article, the top center of a web page, or in a database, video, or image record. Write the titles of the item itself in sentence case in your reference entries. So for example, the title of a journal article, you would put that in sentence case. The title of a book chapter, you would put that in sentence case. The title of a web page, you would put that in sentence case. In sentence case, how you do this is you capitalize the first word of the title, the first word of a subtitle, and any proper nouns. Some titles are italicized in APA style, depending on the source type, and some are not. So again, how can you tell which titles do I italicize and which ones don't I? Check our APA citation guide or the APA style manual for the particular type of source you want to cite to see how you want to format the title. So for instance, if we go back onto the guide for the dictionary or encyclopedia entry, we can see that we put in the title of the dictionary or encyclopedia entry in italics and in sentence case. Oh, that's the source information. But the title of the entry itself, is in regular font in lowercase. All right. So continuing on with the element of the title, you may need to include a bracketed description after the title. So this tends to be for works outside of the peer-reviewed academic literature and works that are not text-based. So for example, videos, images, that kind of thing. Again, how to figure out when you need to include a bracketed description, check our APA citation guide or the APA style manual on the type of source and see whether it needs a bracketed description with it. So for example, for videos, online videos, under YouTube or other streaming video, you can see in the format, let me scroll down. You can see in the format that we put in the title of the video in italics, and that is followed by the word video in square brackets. And that is to indicate that this source is a video. And lastly, the source element. So the source element, that the kind of source information that you include, well, it varies. It varies depending on the resource type that you want to cite. So the type of source information that you're going to include is going to vary depending if you're citing a journal article, a book, a web page, an image, and so on and so forth. Usually, rule of thumb, it's going to include something like, it's going to include a title of where that item belongs to, or it's going to include publisher information or like a website name. So for instance, a journal article, you would put in the journal title. For a book, you would put in the publisher information, and for a web page, you would put in the website name. So typically, the name of the source, for example, the journal title, is in title case. And what title case refers to is each main word starts with a capital letter, and little words like of and the, in, those little kind of connector words, they're in lowercase. Also, you include the online retrieval information if applicable. So you include the DOI, the digital object identifier, or the URL. And note that I say applicable because remember that if you found the source in something that is password protected, like you had to log in with your JAG ID and password, and there is no DOI for it, there is only a URL, you don't include the URL because no one else outside of this institution can access it. Whereas anyone can access a DOI. Only include the URL if it's freely available. When the author and the publisher or website name are the same, then omit the publisher information from the source element to avoid repetition. So we had talked about this with the report example. We had got, because we said hypothetically Pew Research Centre had authored the report, so then we had omitted Pew Research Centre from that source element so it would not be repeated. Again, check the APA style manual or our APA citation guide for the specific resource type you want to cite. And that way you can find out the details to include in the source section. So for instance, if I wanted to look at how to cite a web page, and I'll go down to web pages. And let's say this web page is by a personal author. So we've got the author, the month and day, blah, blah, the title of the web page. And then for the source information, we need the title of the website in title case, and that's in regular font. And it is followed by the URL. Note that if I'm going to cite a web page with a group author, and I put in the group author and the rest of the information, and then I only include the title of the website in title case if it is different to the group author, because you're going to find with websites that a lot of the time the group author and the name of the website are one and the same. So you omit the group author, you omit the title of the website if the group author is the same, and then you follow it by the URL. All right, so I can't help but reiterate this. I've said this a couple of times already, but it's very important to know when to include DOIs and URLs. So always include the DOI if the work has one. So if there is a digital object identifier, you provide it. Even if you use a print version and you didn't access it digitally, APA still wants you to provide it. You would often find the DOI on the first page of the journal article or in the database record. And if you generate the citation from Galileo, usually it will include the DOI in there. And to put in the DOI, make sure that you put in https://doi.org/. You put that as the prefix. That is pretty important. APA style wants you to do it that way. And you're going to find when you're copying and pasting the DOIs that some of them are going to have different prefixes. So make sure you follow that prefix. Once again, only include the URL for a source if you know that it isn't password protected, meaning that, you know, a person outside of AU can get to it. Think of it like the friend test. Can your friend who is not an AU student access that same journal article using the URL that you gave them? If they need to log in, then no, we do not include that URL because that URL is password protected. Now, if the journal article has no DOI, then what we do is we treat it as a print item. And same with an ebook, it's the same thing. If the ebook has no DOI, treat it as a print item unless an outside user can get to it. For example, some journal articles are freely available online. These tend to be informally published articles. And some ebooks are also freely available online. The US government has put out a lot of free ebooks on different topics that people can download. So yeah, you can include the URL if outside users can get to it without needing a login. And just a reminder, where you can find the DOI in a journal article tends to be in the header or the footer of the article. And if it's not there, then check out the database record. URLs. So URLs stand for Uniform Resource Locator. In other words, it's the web address. You find the URL in the web address bar. So for instance, the URL to this web page is right here. If I copy and paste it in a document, then I'm pasting the URL. So include the URLs for works that are freely available to the public, that you don't need a password to get into them. If the URL is very long, you can use a URL shortener like Bitly. Bitly is a shortener service. You plug in the URL and it will generate for you this mini URL, a shortcut. If you can generate a stable URL for a particular source, then use the stable URL. APA style, that is their first preference. So for example, with YouTube videos often have stable URLs to them. How you find it is if you go to the share button, and then you copy, that is the stable URL. See how this URL is different from that URL? So the one at the top on the web address, in the web address bar. So that is not a stable URL. We want the stable version. That way it is more reliable, much less likely to break. So putting together the elements. Some reminders from before. Put in the information in a reference entry in order of the author, followed by the date, followed by the title, followed by the source. Place periods after each reference element, except for after a DOI or a URL to avoid interfering with link functionality. And some other guidelines: when you create your reference entries, they need to be double spaced like the rest of your paper. And use a hanging indent of 1/2 inch for each reference entry. All right. So thank you for your attention. If you have questions, do consult the following resources first: the APA Style Manual, the Library Citation Guide, and the APA Style website. And if your questions aren't being answered by these 3 main sources, then contact me or reach out to the Ask a Librarian service if I'm unavailable. Okay, thank you for your attention.